how many people do you know are using DuckDuckGo? I know maybe a handful, right? Not a very popular search engine. DuckDuckGo gets more traffic than ChatGPT does. It's kind of weird because a lot of us, most of us are using large language models, but actually the traffic conversion and even the ability to do attribution is still a growing pipeline.
Hey everyone, I'm Mark DeGrasse, host of the AI Branding Podcast, and this is the podcast where we talk about practical applications of AI and specifically the importance of branding in the use of AI. And this is our season 2, which we haven't been on for a bit, but we're very happy to be back. And there's been tons of developments over the last 2 years. So let's go ahead and dive in. Today we have my friend Adam Chronister. And what's funny is we actually spoke, I think, at the beginning of when AI started to take off. We met at a conference in Costa Rica. It's been, I want to say 3 or 4 years since then. He is the founder of Enleaf, and he's going to be coming out with a book that is totally in line with how we use AI at the AI Branding Academy, which is going to be out soon, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So welcome, Adam.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's good to reconnect. It's been a minute. So
it is, it's kind of funny because I took, probably a year and a half or 2 years off, kind of, a bunch of public posting. And the reason was because AI didn't actually develop like I thought it would. Like I had a lot of big predictions about, it's going to improve so much over the next couple of years. And in a lot of ways, it hasn't. It's gone worse in some ways, gone better in some ways too. But I think we're much more mature than we were at the beginning.
Yeah, it's definitely, I say same thing. There's certain things I expected which haven't come to pass, and other things that I'm somewhat surprised by. And so it is one of those arenas where it's hard to keep up with it all, right? For me, it's the whole like trying to avoid the shiny object syndrome, but also not missing out on where there are opportunities to actually leverage this for myself or our clients' advantage, right? So it's finding that balance is sometimes going to be dizzying.
Oh, it is. And I think we're kind of the OGs of kind of the internet space where we were around when the internet started. And I think there's a lot of similarities between, when you saw the internet started, there was this glut of, solutions and, a bunch of shysters trying to sell items that didn't actually benefit businesses, but everybody was so ignorant of how it worked that they're just buying, right? Like, oh yeah, this kill this guy, and you see, well, especially in the SEO space, that used to be rampant with solutions.
Yeah, it's very reminiscent. I mean, it's in both good and bad ways, right? Like where in some regard, like having been early in the SEO space back when it was quote unquote easy, right? When, you did everything from keyword stuffing to just the stuff that worked overnight. A lot of this whole AI environment, especially as it relates to, search, is kind of like that Wild West period where there's a lot of cool things and hacks and tricks you can do. But the challenge that we have right now is, how valuable is that? There is value there, but actually finding attribution for that value, that's still a challenge and still, I think, a piece undiscovered. And so we had the same thing back in, the early days of search where it's like, oh, there's this cool thing you can do to manipulate the search engines, but there was no really good attribution systems or models. But I think that gap is starting to slowly close, but it's not perfect by any means yet.
No, I think it's still, wow. The funny thing is I think SEO is working like it used to a little bit better now than it has probably in the last 10 years. Cause there was a portion where just like, man, nobody's ranking. Nobody knows how the algorithm works anymore. I always had a volume model where I was just like, I'm just going to do a lot, 5-10 pages a day. And some of it will rank, a lot of it won't, but at least I'm covering my bases with good information. But now I think my hope was that AI would correct it where it's like, hey, I'm going to partner, since I know my users so well, I could partner them with a solution that's perfect because that solution or that vendor has so much information that they're obviously the authority in that space. which has kind of happened. I mean, are you seeing,
Mhm.
better content producers ranking better in terms of AISO or whatever you want to call that?
Um, to be honest, right now, not necessarily. I mean, I'm seeing a lot of the same like mismatch
Mm.
in results. Um, some of it is maybe slightly better, but there's also a lot of stuff where, um, it's you can tell that the top, the top uh, like leaders in a space aren't necessarily showing up in those systems,
Mm.
right? And quite the contrary, like we've been able to, do like prompt tracking and different tactics to kind of manipulate how, brands show up in those search systems, those large language models. And so that tells me that we're still in this kind of area where there's a lot of ability to be able to manipulate those systems. In fact, I think it's
Mm.
almost easier than search engines in some regard. Search engines have evolved, at least with Google, and I'm sure others have followed suit, where they have a lot more baked into how they attribute authority, right? So PageRank and link sculpting and all this stuff was a big part of that. Not a perfect system by any means, but better than just, purely contextual relevance. And so that's, I think, the challenge and also the opportunity, depending on how you look at things, right? I'm in the arena of helping brands show up more prominently in search. And so for us, it's an advantage because a lot of these large language models, they work purely on consensus.
Mm.
So if you create enough consensus across different channels, it's actually pretty easy to show up in these large language models, right?
Huh.
So really the way that I look at it, it's kind of like the modern state of search, at least as it relates to AI overviews and large language models, is essentially what we used to call reputation management,
Mm.
right? And so, before we hit record, we were talking a little bit about this, about kind of this emergence of brand and consensus and search. It's kind of all somewhat blending together, which is good and bad, right? In some extent, you can do this naturally. Like if you have natural footprint, a lot of good PR, a good brand, a good reputation, you're going to float to the surface just by that, just by the pure nature of that consensus. But it's also very easy to build consensus, and that opens up a whole nother can of
Mm.
worms into the like ethereal idea of what is a brand, right? Like, the whole fake it till you make it, and is that valuable? What separates one brand from another? At the end of the day, is it all kind of boiled into perception? And I think in some extent the answer is yes, right?
Yeah, I mean it's again it goes back to the regular SEO where it's like who has the maximum backlinks, except I think that
Hmm.
is harder to manipulate than it was back in the day where somebody might say,
Yeah.
because I knew guys who set up 100 websites and then, hey, I'm going to get you ranking, and all he would do is post the backlink on his 100 websites, and then all of a sudden
Yeah, right.
people would pop up. So I think the systems are a little bit more sophisticated than they were before. But the big
Yeah.
question I have for you is, since it is so easy to make tons of content with AI, is the
Hmm.
massive amounts of AI content that people are pushing out, does that still influence, your rank in terms of showing up on search or AI?
Yes and
Or
no. There's a whole phenomenon now where you can definitely move the needle, but there's a risk because Google is pretty good at determining, at least in the search realm, determining when there is an artificial increase of mass content, right? And so I've seen case study after case study where brands will just pump out tons and tons of AI content, and they'll see really nice spikes. But if you do it too aggressively, Google will kind of do the whole Google slap, right?
yeah.
And so it's a risk reward. I would still caution about going from 0 to 100, right? Like you still want the footprint to be natural, at least as it relates to search engines. And that's the other thing too, the conversation that we're having a lot with clients and prospects is I think there's kind of this misnomer that there's a lot more traffic being derived from these large language models than what there really is, right? But I like to tell people, how many people do you know are using DuckDuckGo? I know maybe a handful, right? Not a very popular search engine. DuckDuckGo gets more traffic than ChatGPT does, right? And I think it's probably third or fourth in the search engines, somewhere along those lines, right? So it's kind of weird because most of us are using large language models, but actually the traffic conversion and even the ability to do attribution is still a growing pipeline and potentiality really.
Yeah, well, it's so funny you say that because I had a conversation a couple of weeks ago with Adam McChesney, and he
Uh,
actually produced a report on the traffic that he generates for contractors. And he said,
mhm.
even though they're 100% focused on AISO or whatever you want to call it, it was 5% of the
Yeah,
traffic. The
yeah.
95% was just traditional searches, or I think it
Mhm.
was Google Business was a
Yeah,
big,
that makes
big.
sense for local businesses. Yeah.
It does, and
And
it's kind
5% is high. Like that's actually
yeah,
pretty high.
that's
That's
doing good.
much, yeah. We're seeing, I mean, probably closer to 1%. We
Wow.
have attribution for, SaaS businesses that bring in $250,000 a month. And you look at how much they're attributing revenue wise from LLM systems, it's like $100 a month, right? So you do the math. Um, but at the same time, we know that these things are going to increase in market share and viability. We have ChatGPT, which now has integrations with Shopify, and so we do want to have those systems in place and start iterating those so that as behaviors change, we have that data. But at the end of the day, you have to keep in mind a lot of these systems still rely on search as their backbone. So Google AI Overviews is, of course, integrated right into Google. ChatGPT at least has some legacy data from Bing. And then, of course, there's the platforms that tie a lot into social. And so we can't forget all of the foundation data, like bedrocks that inform these things, right? So we still preach a lot of good AEO or whatever moniker you want to use is good, technical SEO. Now things have shifted slightly. We still, for instance, do link acquisition and all the stuff we traditionally do, but we're spending a lot more time on things like schema markup, doing content structure that has a lot of Q&A, so FAQs or long form blog posts. We're doing like TLDRs, basically feeding the Q&A format that large language models like, but also paying attention to things that traditionally kind of fell off. So PR is a big thing. There's a lot of hubbub about listicles, right? A lot of people have been taking advantage of those, and that's because honestly, they still work, right? You will hear some FUD saying, oh, they don't work. Google's penalizing these. And like anything else, if you overuse it, you're going to create a footprint and you're going to get caught. But I can tell you from our own case studies and many that I've seen, self-promotional listicles are still a thing, right? We have a process where we stack all of this with PR and other kind of third-party signals to give it a more holistic approach. But those are the things that still work, right? I think the biggest difference though is we're still focusing very much on page for clients, but we're not only focusing on page. We're also looking at those external platforms and signals, again, to build this consensus. Because if you build a consensus and a narrative and you distribute that across a number of different touch points, that's the kind of thing that large language models love. Their whole job is to aggregate and understand data. And so if you can help tip the scales there, that's in my mind, kind of the new realm of visibility in search marketing.
No, it's so funny you mentioned PR too, because that's actually the original thing I did when I got into marketing was I thought I read this book. It was called Guerrilla PR, And I was like, you don't even need marketing. You just need PR. That was wrong, by the way. But
Yeah, right.
but I still was doing, when I had my original company, I was doing one press release a week. It was just something that we did.
Yeah,
And that I think it was like 25 or 30% of our traffic. And I had thousands
yeah,
of pages on my website. But that you got the backlinks, it got
yeah,
attention as you're an authority because you're appearing on all these news websites, and it
right.
still works. That and your
Yeah,
FAQ mention, where I was like,
yeah,
I still
exactly.
teach workshops
Yep.
probably several times a month on how to write a press release. Now we use,
Yeah,
AI to help us write it, but it's still,
exactly.
you submit it to free. You don't even have to pay for it. You just go to free
Yeah,
platforms.
there's free platforms out there. There's one, I almost don't want to share it, but it's PR log.
Oh yeah,
And these
PR.
tend to rotate, but that one you can pop in Google News like all the time. You get one press release free a month. And there's others, but that one, at least right now, seems to be the one that is popping up in Google News, and it's literally free. And so I've been doing a few talks this year on this idea of using PR and branding and things like this, podcast interviews to start building your personal brand for showing up in these systems. Um, but we're using PR like we haven't in years. Now we're not really using it the way we used to. We used to use it almost exclusively for the backlink. We still embed those backlinks, but I don't know how much value those backlinks honestly
Mhm.
have anymore. But the value is in the consensus, right? We've been able to, so we did a case study, for instance. We have a dummy brand based in Texas. It's a complete fictional brand, but it has a faux physical footprint, faux website, all of this kind of stuff. And so whenever we're doing case study tests or testing, we use this brand as an example. We created one single press release. We wanted to see what we could do with one press release. We essentially fabricated the idea that this particular company won two awards, which are real awards in Austin, and did a before and after based on a reputation search. Like, is this a good brand? The AI overviews are like, hey, we don't have enough data to understand whether this is a good brand or not. After the fact, it said, yes, this is a great brand. They have 5 stars on Google. They're featured in the Austin, yada yada, awards. And so for us, it was very insightful because with literally one press release, we were able to manipulate what the large language model systems said about this brand. And that's kind of what we've come to understand is, especially for new brands, there's such little noise if you're just starting a business or you haven't done much branding or PR that you can weight the scales quite easily. Now,
Mhm.
if you have a brand that either has a really good reputation or on the other end, the bad reputation, you have to counteract that with more noise or alternative sentiment, right? So there's more heavy lifting. But at the end of the day, it's kind of for those people that have ever done reputation management, it's kind of like where we're at right now. It's all reputation management, either proactive or retroactive, depending on your situation, right?
Mhm. No, well, and I like how you're talking about, and I'm going to mention something that's been a debate probably since I've been doing internet marketing, which is the question of volume, where it was always, hey, should I do one awesome article per month, or, is it okay if I do just lots of little articles? And I was always in the case, because I never really understand what people are looking for. I was always volume. I'm like, no, just do
Yeah.
good content, but do lots of it. Plus, you could always repurpose content. Like, for example, when I do
Yeah.
an article, I could pull definitions from that article and build a dictionary. I could pull a FAQ list. I could pull
Mhm.
quotes. I could pull and all these things. So one article is actually 40 pieces of content, and I could post a
Yeah.
page for each one. But with that said, in the AI beginning era, do you think volume helps?
Um, I, I I wouldn't say volume, I would say consensus, right? And I know I keep using that term, but the the idea is that you put a narrative out into the world and you want that narrative to repeat across, multiple independent channels,
Hmm.
right? So it's not so much about volume. In fact, even now, like there's a lot of changes in generalized search where those 3,000 word blog posts are almost unnecessary or less helpful than they used to be, right? A lot of what's also ranking naturally when it comes to page content, at least here recently, is actually more focused on your service pages, your product pages, those pages that actually convert into actions or sales. And so that's a big shift we're seeing now as well. I don't know so much if that's in response to the large language models, or if search engines are finally starting to realize, like, long form content in this current world is less than helpful. But we're seeing shifts there as well, right?
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, and I call it volume just because I think it's easier. When I got the question, I was always like, yeah, as I was on it, I was managing their content, and we were doing like 5 to 12 pages a day on the website. So I was always like, yeah, you need more. Like, why would more be bad as long as the content's good? And because I think people equate it to spamming, where it was just like, oh, you're just putting up a bunch of junk. I'm like, no, this is all good stuff. I'm just able to take, say this podcast, I could take a 30 to 45-minute conversation. That could be several articles depending on the topics that we covered. It could be a list of FAQs. It could be, of course, quotes, pulling that, making graphics and all this stuff. So I'm like, no, you just do a podcast. You'll have so much content.
Well, and I think it depends on the type of content too. Like, if it's just blog post content, I think blog style content is starting to fall out of favor with a lot of these systems just because it's so easy to do. But if it's things like white papers, case studies, service descriptions, product descriptions, that's where I think volume can still have a big impact, right? We're starting to create, and this isn't anything new, but like large topical authority maps where we're covering every aspect of a particular business's services, right? And layering that in a well thought out structure. Now, we're not necessarily embedding all of that in a menu because you'd have hundreds and hundreds of menu items, but we have the top level navigation and then secondary, which is embedded in anchor text and secondary infrastructure. So that stuff still works, right? But unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, it's so easy to create a long form piece of SEO optimized content in the form of a blog post that, unless you're doing something unique, it's not going to get as much focus, right? That's the other area too that we're starting to like try to figure out how to weave in. We've done it for our brand and a couple other brands, but you have to think that because the barrier to entry for content is so low, the ability to have unique content is really helpful. So I'll give you an example. We're rewriting a lot of our service pages, and I created a open clause system that went out and crawled every podcast I'd been on, created a transcript, and now I'm telling our team, whenever you're creating this service landing page, I want you to include in that prompt a reference to this master sheet of things that I've said, or ways that I've articulated an idea, because that is something that is most likely very unique. It's not something that's already regurgitated. Other ways you can do this is you can build your content prompts so that you include a question that's answered by your founder or your CEO or your managers. So you have to think about these large language models as data sponges, right? And they want to find unique data, unique content. So, the last thing you're going to do to get unique content is just pulling from systems that are already out there that are just spinning this. So if you can think in that direction, that's where you're going to win, right? I'm working on a transcript right now for a book, like I mentioned earlier, called Authority Engine. And I did the same thing. I took this archive of podcast, interviews, speeches and talks that I've given, and I've used that as the framework, the outline of my book, right? And once I got the outline kind of crafted, I was like, oh, this is actually a decent topical outline that really only could have been written by me. So that's the way that we're trying to approach content right now, is give these systems what they want, which is uh, unique pieces of information or content that they can reference.
I love that. Well, and you're talking about the structure, because I think structure is
Yeah.
where you get a lot of that uniqueness, because we all categorize things differently. And honestly, the way I describe it about why AI likes that is because I think processing the information gets much easier and faster, which then saves the company that's hosting the AI money. And so
Yeah.
I'm always trying to find with these things. I'm like, if you really want to know why they operate the way they do, or why they might seem stupid in some regards in terms of how they work, it's because it's cheaper. And so
Yeah. Yeah.
that's why it's like, getting the best answer or the right answer isn't necessarily a priority for some of these AI systems, because it'll cost too much money to justify.
Right.
It's easier to
Yeah.
go to a listicle, going back to you
Yeah.
saying listicles still work. It's like, yeah, because it's organized. If I say, hey, I need
Hmm.
give me 10 interesting statistics in the contractor business that are going on,
Right.
in the last year, would it want to go to the authorities that generate the statistics, or just drop you into a 5 different listicles that have the information in there? And
Yeah.
listicles is the answer. So, it all fits
And that's
together.
kind of the difference too. Like, the traditional blog marketing approach was, hey, we're going to help answer questions. So people enter our website based on a query, see our blog, and then get familiar with our brand and eventually convert, right?
Yep.
But right now we're in a scenario where a lot of those queries are being answered right away. And so that conversion point is essentially disappearing. And that's why you have to rethink about, how do I speak about my product or service that answers a query that is more kind of down that buyer intent.
Mhm.
So even though we've seen, traffic diminish in some regard for a lot of brands, um, we're seeing that the quality of traffic for a lot of brands is actually starting to improve, right? So we're starting to look at more metrics of quality and conversions, which at the end of the day, if you're running a business, like, you don't as much care about how much traffic you get. You want to say how much revenue am I actually generating from the traffic that I do have? Like,
Well, that's actually something that Adam McChesney mentioned too, was that the AI traffic wasn't, a huge portion of the traffic, but the AI leads they got were actually worth more. And
yeah,
he thought it was more because the person who was listening to the advice obviously did a lot more research, because they were using AI to essentially, crunch the numbers and get the data. And then
yeah,
ended up with the vendor that they ended up signing up with. So
yeah.
I thought that was really interesting, going back to the, volume versus quality. It's not huge right now, but I think it is a growing portion. But the really good
Yeah.
news for everybody is that SEO still works, and
Yeah.
make more content.
Yep. 100%. Yeah. Yeah. There's always going to be a vertical. Anytime there's somebody searching, there's going to be opportunities to take your brand or business and make it more visible in those systems, right?
Mhm.
Like, the channels might change, but the opportunities are always going to be there, even if they're changing and evolving over time.
Yeah, they look a little different. Well, with that said, if you could give one piece of advice for business owners, a lot of AI things out there, like in regards to how they could get exposure, say, what do you recommend they do?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day is like, just be curious. Don't be afraid to play with these systems. I think a lot of business owners, especially those on the less technical side, get overwhelmed or even kind of fearful of these systems. And I think the better approach is to be curious, right? Like, that's where we start seeing business owners go from kind of cautious to even excited, right?
Mm.
I think some of the coolest projects that I'm seeing right now are not by tech enthusiasts. They're people that have, never coded a website in their life, but they have a really great idea that they've brought in from their own business or challenges, and now for the first time, they can put together, a prototype or at least articulate an idea and manifest it, right? So I think be curious, don't be afraid of the tools and systems. Get your feet a little bit wet and see where it takes you.
Excellent. That's fantastic advice. And just to add on to that, you're not too late. I think, because a lot of
No,
people
not at
think,
all.
Like, oh no, I've missed the boat for AI. It's like, no, we're just getting past the lame part of this new technology.
We're like maybe in AOL, AOL days.
Yes. No, that's a great
to give it the analogy, right? So.
Well, thank you so much, Adam. Great talk.
My pleasure.
I think things are looking up in a lot of regards, and it's neat to see that you're already helping small business owners take advantage of what's coming out. Where can people learn more about you?
Yeah, so a quick search for my name. I'm pretty easy to find. Other than that, you can find out about our agency and what we do at enleaf.com. That's ENLEAF.com.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Adam. And thank you for listening. Pleasure. This has been the AI Branding Podcast, where we talk to a lot of marketers, but also a lot of business owners who are using AI to improve their businesses and their lives. So if you want more content like that, please subscribe.